Okay, so yeah, I've got essentially sort of 7 tips that I'd like to share with you all today. They all do kind of blend into one another as well, and that's just kind of happy chance. But I'm going to kick off with my first one, and it's all about recognizing your strengths and your weaknesses. Being really, really honest with yourself about the stuff that you're good at, the stuff you enjoy, really. And saying, do you know what, there's some of these bits that I just don't want to be doing, and getting the right people around you to support you. A really good example of this is going back to my days in an ad agency. We were churning out sometimes hundreds of ads a week, and a supplier rang me up one morning and said, Andy, I'm sure we're supposed to have some artwork from you today. And I was like, really? I said, yeah, I'm pretty sure it was all in the diary, and I'd missed it. But because they knew what we did and how we did it, they helped kind of nudge that along, and we turned it around, and the client never knew that there'd even been an issue, that I'd forgotten to kind of start the whole process moving forward. And that was done within a sort of 24-hour window. And I couldn't have done that on my own. And, it's making sure that there's people that have got your back. Carrying all that burden on your own shoulders is really, really hard. So I would say top tip is to look at the things you enjoy, recognize the things you don't, and find somebody else that can help you with those, and nurture those relationships, really. And I know that you all do that because we're all in this group, and that's a big part of what the Drive ethos is. But I think it bears reiterating, really. Out of the back of that is my next kind of thing, which I was going to come into, which is all about speed. And that might sound like a kind of slightly crazy thing to say, I suppose. But my question to everyone is, do you set yourself demanding deadlines? And the reason I'm asking this is it's amazing what you can do when you've got some pressure exerted on you. Now, whether that's externally or whether you've got somebody that you're going to be accountable to. To give you an example, when I first started my career, I worked in a design agency, and we had deadlines and we were working at a relatively fast pace. But then I took a job at an ad agency, and oh my God, was that a shock to the system. What I was used to as a kind of working week, working day, bore no resemblance to that. At the time that I joined at the same time as another designer. It was, I think, the second day that we were there. He turned to me and said, I think I'm going to go. I said, I don't think I can do this. And I said, oh, okay. I said, it's very early days. We need to kind of give it a bit more time. 6 weeks later, the amount of things that we were doing and how we were operating in that environment, if you'd have told me that before I'd got there, I would have never have believed it possible. So I know it's not necessarily always ideal, but if you've got an idea in your head, doing sprints, putting yourself under a bit of pressure to deliver something, I think is really, really powerful from that point of view, in terms of what you can actually do. And, people can argue that they don't like the pressure, that's fine. But for me, I find it really, really a strong motivator. And it actually means you get quicker with your skills. You'll be able to deliver faster. But whatever you do, if you do go down this route, don't reduce your fees that you're charging for these things. You might suddenly get faster at doing it, but that's because you're upping your skill level, not detracting from the value that you're adding from that point of view. So speed can be important, I suppose, is what I'm saying. Which kind of takes me to my next one. And this was back when I first started my own business with some partners. Lots of things are going on in every business, and it's like, how do we keep a track of all of this? What's going to be that central core? And I'm not going to say that you should use Asana or that it's got to be Slack or whatever, because there's so many different platforms, and it's going to come down to personal preference at the end of the day. But having a tracking system of some form is really, really important. Whether that's just as simple as project numbers, client numbers, client project titles, whatever, however it is that you need to do it, something that tracks where time's going, where expenses are going, something that you can look at quickly and understand the metrics around what's going on. It's really, really powerful, because if you don't, I guarantee you that you'll be undercharging those customers for what you've done. You know, best will in the world, when we look back at things and say, oh, how long did we spend on that last week? You're going to pick a figure, but chances are that figure is probably 70% accurate, something like that. You'll be giving a good 30, maybe more % away. So having some form of tracking what you're doing, it's useful from your billing point of view, but it also focuses your time on how your week is actually going, month, year, etc. So tracking systems are really, really important, I think. And it also, if there's other people involved, like external suppliers or other members of a team, it gives everybody a central point of connection where they can say, right, that is the piece of truth, and this is the number or the code that everything needs to go against. So from my professional career, it's been really, really important to make sure that we've got solid sort of tracking things and systems, which kind of leads into my next point. And you could argue it's probably the same thing, but it's whether you are a paper or a digital person. And again, I think this is really, really personal preference. I know hand on heart that I'm a paper person. I just find it much more liberating to just crash something out on a piece of paper. I can work out and plan something and a structure on paper in minutes, where to try and do that on various different applications takes a lot longer and can be much more disruptive, I find, to other people's workflows as well. Because if I'm hammering something out on a piece of paper, I can sense check that and test it before I actually commit it into a digital system, at which point it notifies all those other people that are working in that system. If you're manipulating and moving stuff around kind of as a work in progress thing, the chaos that can ensue for other people is just doesn't bear thinking about. So I massively advocate paper, but you know, there's so many different systems that you could do. It's going to be a case of finding what works for you, and kind of, yeah, just try a few things. I think when thinking about that in terms of planning in general, there's a lot of people that you speak to say that that's what they do on a Monday morning, that they plan their week, etc. I tend not to do that. I like to do it on a Friday. Friday afternoon is my planning time, because I find that much more productive. My head's still in the game. I can look at what we've delivered during the course of that week, and if I'm being absolutely honest, it gives me the ability to really clear my head before the weekend, so that I can enjoy my time away from the office without having to think, do I remember, or I've got to do, because when your head's in the game, your gears are already that much higher up, and you will be functioning much quicker and higher. Coming back at it cold, I believe, on a Monday is a harder piece. You know, Monday morning cannot be always the most productive time anyway, but trying to then remember where things are at and what you need to do. For me, I just find it means that the week starts much harder than it needs to. Whereas if you put the time in on a Friday, you come in Monday morning and bang, you know exactly where you are and what you need to do. So that's one of my personal tips that I find to be really, really useful. And around that, and I'm sure everybody does this, is meetings and meeting time. These days, you know, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be in person, face to face, but the prep time that you need to put in ahead of that, making sure that you're not just literally walking out of one thing and into another, because it's just not possible. You know, we've all got lots going on, but if you literally step away from one piece of work and drop yourself into a meeting, I guarantee that first 5 minutes that you're there, you're not really going to be there, because your head's still in what you were doing before. And that's particularly important when it comes to the other way, coming out of the meeting, the decompression time that we all need. Meetings are exhausting things at the end of the day, and you need some time afterwards for reflection, for making notes in whatever form that might be. Whether it's that you're going to use your phone to dictate some notes into, send yourself an email, scribble some notes on paper, whatever that is. But having that space either side, it's so important. And when you're doing your planning, make sure that you build that in. And it's the other thing that I learned quite early on is don't think of the planning as being a kind of a luxury. It's a necessity. It's an absolute necessity. If you're not doing some form of business planning every week, then I guarantee that you'll be missing so many opportunities, and the whole business will start to feel much more like it's square wheeling rather than running nice and smooth and free from that point of view. So as difficult as it may sometimes appear to have that time, it's probably one of the most important times that you can carve out in the week, I believe, because it's powerful that not only you've got sight of where you need to go, the people who are working with you and supporting you have got sight of where they need to go and where things need to be as well from that point of view. Out of the back of that comes my next point, and this one's really, really tricky, I think, to do today, and I'm calling it setting boundaries around your communications. We've all got so many ways of getting in touch with folks. It's just crazy. Different people have different preferences. I think it's really, really important that when you start working with people, whether they be a supplier or a client and customer, that you're clear about how and where you expect that communication to take place, and to police it as well, because people will take liberties. They'll send you a text at some ungodly hour because then they don't have to think about it anymore, and it's suddenly become your problem. Well, that's no good. You can't be enjoying your evening if suddenly a text arrives at 10 o'clock with somebody saying, I've got to have this in the morning. If that's really that important, they need to put it in the channel that it would normally go through. And it can be a tricky piece to sort of say to people, thanks for that, but please put it in the way, through the way that we normally communicate. An example that I'm going to give around this was an absolutely crazy meeting that I went to. So one of my customers delivers security for wealthy individuals, big properties. And I was asked to attend a meeting where a television personality was presenting an interior scheme to their client. This particular individual had sent a text to the customer at 4 a.m. to say, I've just had this great idea and I needed to share it with you ahead of tomorrow morning's presentation. And when I found out about this, I looked at the customer and thought, blimey, I bet you were happy to receive that at 4 o'clock in the morning. And they made a big song and dance about it in their presentation. And as they left, the customer turned to me and said, there's just no way I can work with someone that does stuff like that. And whether it was truth or whether it was a story that someone had made up as part of their presentation, I don't know. And to be honest, I don't care, but it illustrates just how disruptive it can be when someone tries to communicate with you. Basically they just want to do a brain dump onto you. So make sure that you manage that really, really carefully, and be quite authoritative, I suppose, about making sure that it all stays in the right place, because otherwise the creep these days is just ridiculous. And unfortunately, we've all got a means by which we can be communicated with at any given time. So yeah, protect that as much as you possibly can. Right, I'm nearly at the end of my narrative of different things. The next one is to recognize when you're not being productive, which I think is probably one of the hardest things. So my kind of take on this is to make sure I've got a process in place for when this happens, rather than having to think about it at the time. So for me, getting out for a walk, some fresh air, going for a short cycle, that makes a world of difference to my outlook, and just gives me that kind of headspace to reset, I suppose. But it's about being self-aware, I suppose, and realizing that you're suddenly on the death scroll, and you're just, what are you doing? You're not actually doing anything productive. You're just filling in time, and catching yourself and saying this isn't good. And at which point the kind of the inner voice is saying to you, just get down and do some work, when actually you're just not in that zone. It's not going to happen. So it sounds counterintuitive, but you actually need to step away and do something completely different, then come back afresh. So having those little systems in place, so you're not having to kind of think about it as it happens, it's really, really powerful, I think, because you can lose a lot of your working time by trying to sort of power on through, when the braver thing is to actually step away and come at it afresh. So highly, highly recommend that. And my last one is to be selfish with your time. Something that I personally have found quite difficult in the past. Anne mentioned the stuff that I do these days. To my shame, I spent a huge period of my early working life where I just worked, really. That's pretty much all I can say. I only took the statutory holidays, didn't do anything, assumed that this was going to be the making of the business, and all sorts of different things. And it went well, and then it completely and utterly exploded. And I found myself in a place I never envisaged, trying to pick up pieces and glue stuff back together. So yeah, make sure that you kind of completely and utterly guard your personal time. I think build some fun stuff into what you're doing, because that's important, right? We're doing these things, we're building these businesses to pay the bills, but also to give us the funds to go and do some fun stuff. And fun stuff doesn't have to cost loads of money. Fun stuff can be as simple as going for a walk on a beach or something, but it needs to be there. Otherwise, what's the point, really? Is what I would say. And yeah, that's pretty much it. I don't know whether that's given anybody any kind of great epiphany moments or anything, but these are things that have made a big difference to me over the years. And yeah, I hope that there's something there that's useful and that you can take away.
Thank you, Andy. That's brilliant.